Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into source material covering a really pivotal moment. President Trump's return to Washington. This was back in May 2025, right?
That's right. Just after that major diplomatic trip through the Middle East.
Yeah, and the sources we've looked at, they really paint a picture of this journey, focusing on the outcomes, what they were trying to achieve, and, the key details that stood out.
It's quite a picture, too, because the material immediately points to this dual nature of the trip.
Dual nature, how so?
Well, on one side, you've got these clearly marked significant investment agreements, business deals, big wins there.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, the sources show him grappling with some, let's say, pretty big unresolved peace goals.
Right. So let's jump straight into what these sources highlight. Where should we start?
Agreed. Let's maybe start with the clear successes the material highlights, the economic wins.
Makes sense.
There was definitely a strong focus reported on securing investment pledges, pitching American business abroad.
And they even mentioned a slogan, didn't they? Something repurposed.
Yeah, making energy great again. Used at one event, apparently. It sort of ties into that economic focus.
Huh. Interesting. It really frames that economic angle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What kind of deals are we actually talking about here based on the sources?
Oh, massive ones. I mean, the material points to a $600 billion investment deal secured from Saudi Arabia.
600 billion. Wow.
Yeah. And another really significant agreement with Qatar Airways, buying hundreds of planes from major American companies, Boeing and GE Aerospace.
These aren't small numbers then.
Not at all. They represent enormous potential economic ties, you see.
And the sources mention President Trump taking a very hands-on approach.
Yeah.
Acting almost as a lead salesman.
Exactly. There's one quote captured where he says something like, "We have a president in the United States doing this selling."
Right. And he contrasted it with Biden, didn't he?
He did. Suggesting, you think Biden would be doing this? I don't think so. It gives you a sense from the accounts of his personal involvement in the business side.
Yeah, definitely.
And like you said, that making energy great again phrase, it points to a deliberate effort, it seems, to link this diplomacy directly to his economic agenda, especially around energy and industry.
And for you listening, what this kind of reporting highlights is, well, the potential impact of these mega deals.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking hundreds of billions in investment, major plane orders. The sources frame these not just as diplomatic wins,
Right. But as tangible economic moves.
moves that could potentially send ripple effects through American manufacturing, aviation, the global energy market even. It's one clear metric of success highlighted in the coverage.
Definitely. Now, contrasting pretty sharply with those economic agreements, the sources then shift. They move to the main goals that, well, despite the efforts, remained elusive when the trip ended.
Okay, so what were those?
Major peace deals, specifically in places like Gaza and Ukraine.
This was clearly a stated priority for him, wasn't it? Ending these conflicts.
Oh, absolutely. The sources mention his commitment, even detailing the dispatch of Special Envoy Steve Witkoff specifically to work on these issues in the region.
Okay.
And they do note one specific outcome. It was facilitated by Qatar, actually, before the trip wrapped up.
Which was?
The release of Eden Alexander, an American who had been held by Hamas. It's highlighted as a concrete step in a very complex landscape.
Absolutely. That's a significant humanitarian outcome, a real positive step.
It is. Yet the broader reality described in the sources as the president departed was that the wars were still raging, ongoing.
Yeah, there's that striking detail, isn't there, of the president looking out at Gaza from Air Force One.
Mm-hmm. He's quoted saying they would get that taken care of and also noting a lot of people are starving.
It paints a picture.
And the coverage really underscores the grim situation with the specific detail. According to local health authorities cited in the material, Israeli airstrikes had reportedly killed over 100 people in Gaza.
Just in the 24 hours before he left.
In just those 24 hours. It's a stark reminder, really, of the persistent violence and, frankly, the difficulty of achieving those ambitious peace goals, even with high-level engagement.
So, while you have these economic wins on one side, the picture the sources paint regarding these major conflicts is one of ongoing struggle, unresolved challenges.
Exactly.
It really highlights the sheer complexity of tackling these entrenched global crises. Diplomacy alone has its limits sometimes, it seems.
Which kind of leads into the next point. Shifting gears slightly, the sources also detail how the president navigated other significant diplomatic relationships during this trip. It wasn't just about the immediate conflict.
Right, like the discussions or comments around Russia and Ukraine.
Correct. The material mentions the president speaking about potential future opportunities, face-to-face talks with President Putin.
What did he say exactly?
He's quoted saying something like, we have to meet, he and I will meet, I think we'll solve it, or maybe not, kind of covering his bases there.
And it also addresses Putin not being at that planned meeting in Turkey, right, during the trip.
It does. The president's reported perspective was that he didn't believe it was possible for him to go if I didn't go. He cited a schedule conflict.
Okay.
And the sources note his remark that basically nothing would happen during Ukraine peace talks without his direct involvement.
Interesting perspective. And then there's Iran. What did the sources say there?
Well, they point to the possibility, maybe even the hope, of a breakthrough in nuclear talks.
A breakthrough?
Yeah, mentioning that a proposal for a deal had actually been submitted by his administration. Some earlier efforts were described as very serious negotiations with Iran for long-term peace.
So progress, maybe.
There was a hint an agreement could be near, a quote stating, "We're not going to be making any nuclear dust in Iran."
Okay, that's significant. What else? Syria came up too, didn't it?
It did. A particularly notable decision highlighted is the move regarding Syria. The president stated that recognizing the new Syrian government and lifting what he called brutal and biting sanctions was the right thing to do.
And his reasoning?
That the new leadership was, cementing control. The sources also mention him reaching out to Benjamin Netanyahu about this specific decision.
Which is interesting because speaking of Netanyahu, the coverage notes the president didn't visit the Israeli prime minister directly on this trip.
That's right. But he did state that his relationships with Arab leaders were, quote, very good for Israel.
So what all of this shows then, based on these sources, it's just this incredibly complex web, isn't it? Relationships, ongoing negotiations in the Middle East.
Absolutely. It's not just one or two hotspots. You're dealing with nuclear programs, regional stability, shifting diplomatic recognition all at once.
And for you listening, it's really a demonstration of how high-stakes international relations often mean juggling so many sensitive issues simultaneously across different countries, different leaders. It's complicated stuff.
Very much so.
Now, it wouldn't be a high-profile trip like this without some points of controversy, right? And the sources definitely didn't shy away from those.
No, they didn't. One significant issue that got raised was the planned gift from the Qatari government.
Ah, yes, the plane.
The plane. A reported $400 million luxury plane that the president apparently hoped to use as Air Force One.
And that caused some reaction.
Oh, yeah. The sources detail significant backlash from Democrats, but also some Republicans, too, raising questions about potential, ethical conflicts, security concerns, financial implications, the works.
And the president's reaction, as reported,
was apparently to repeatedly dismiss those concerns, just calling it a great gesture.
Okay. And there was another controversy mentioned.
Yes. The sources also touch on accusations that the trip itself, with its heavy focus on deals and investment, created a potential conflict of interest.
Because of his company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Given his namesake company's existing and expanding business interests in the Middle East, he reportedly dismissed these accusations as well.
Right. And it's worth stressing, like you said, the sources just report these details and the reactions. They illustrate some of the unique scrutiny that comes with this kind of diplomacy, especially when personal or business matters might intersect.
Precisely. It's part of the landscape described in the material.
So, to give us some broader perspective on all of this, the sources bring in some expert analysis. They mentioned Brian Katulis.
That's right, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. And Katulis draws some fascinating parallels between this trip and President Trump's earlier Middle East tour back in 2017.
What kind of parallels?
Well, he notes that the 2017 trip's outcomes included things like the Gulf Rift. Remember that period of tension isolating Qatar?
Vaguely.
And he also points to the maximum pressure campaign against Iran, which was mostly economic sanctions. Katulis assesses that as having ultimately failed, by the way.
Okay, so some mixed results from that earlier trip.
Mixed results, yeah. But he also credits that 2017 trip with laying some of the groundwork for the Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab nations.
Right, that's crucial context. So what's Katulis's take on this trip, the 2025 one?
His perspective is that this time around, the president was aiming even higher. like really ambitious goals.
Matter how.
He suggests the ambition was for a historic breakthrough with Iran on the nuclear talks and potentially expanding the Abraham Accords further, specifically mentioning a Saudi-Israeli normalization accord. Catullus even links these aims to hopes for a Nobel Prize.
Wow. Okay. Big picture stuff.
Big picture. The analysis also credits the hosts of the trip, the countries he visited, with playing important mediation roles in these various efforts.
But it wasn't all optimistic, was it? Catullus had a dose of realism.
He did. He wraps up with a quote saying something like, "Unexpected surprises and events have a way of knocking U.S. administrations off balance."
A classic challenge in foreign policy.
Indeed. And he offers his specific assessment that the ongoing war in Gaza and, quote, "the growing misery of Palestinians living there will be a critical test for any administration involved in the region."
Yeah, that expert analysis really helps connect the dots, doesn't it, between the specific events of the trip and these larger ongoing historical political currents in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
It gives you, the listener, a framework for thinking about not just what happened day to day, but what it means in the bigger picture, drawing directly from the expertise cited in the sources.
Exactly. It moves beyond just the headlines, doesn't it? To consider the potential long-term implications and, well, the challenges ahead.
So as we wrap up this deep dive then, looking back at the sources covering this trip, we really see this picture emerge, don't we? A diplomatic journey that clearly achieved significant, tangible economic wins.
Yeah, those massive investment deals, the business agreements, they definitely stand out. $600 billion, the Boeing deal.
Huge numbers. Yet simultaneously, it was a trip marked by these complex, still unresolved challenges. Challenges that just persist in the region and well beyond it too.
Particularly that ongoing, elusive search for peace. In places like Gaza, Ukraine, and those delicate negotiations with Iran, the shifts regarding Syria.
The sources present a reality, really, where high-stakes international diplomacy means navigating both clear opportunities, like for economic gain, and these incredibly difficult, persistent geopolitical hurdles that are just far from overcome.
So maybe the thought to leave you with is this. Given those significant economic agreements we talked about, highlighted right alongside the difficult reality of ongoing conflicts and complex negotiations discussed throughout the source material, what does this deep dive really suggest about the nature of success?
Yeah, what is success in high-stakes international diplomacy in this region?
When you measure it against both those economic indicators and those deeply challenging, sometimes elusive peace goals, what does true achievement even look like? Is it one or the other, both?
Something to ponder, definitely. As you reflect on the various threads we pulled from this material, from the business deals and investment figures to the human cost of conflict and that intricate dance of international relations. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.